All right, it's Jay Stongo, Patrick Austin, Freeland Judge, Jeff Quiroz, Amalegro Yogo Homeless, excuse me, Omakasita Homeless. My name is Patrick Austin Freeland of Wind Clan, the Muskogee Nation of Oklahoma, and it is my honor today to welcome everyone to this second webinar in advanced manufacturing in tribal communities. And I'll talk a little bit about our topic here shortly. But today we're going to talk with some great panelists and experts and have a great discussion and conversation about what works for Indian country when we're talking about advanced manufacturing. But before we get too carried away, I'd like to introduce Dr. Stephen Catt, who is the project manager for this program, and to share a little bit more about how it has come about and who we have to thank for supporting this work. Hello.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Thank you for your welcome as well. It is really a pleasure to see everybody here. Again, this is going to be recorded, so we can use this in a variety of different ways, which is what its intent is. This is sponsored and funded by the National Science Foundation, a particular grant to explore how advanced manufacturing can serve Indian country, tribal communities, and tribal colleges in the best possible way. One of the things we found through our recent research, through a number of stakeholder meetings and visits and a number of conversations with tribal leaders and working with the colleges themselves, there's a lot of good things happening. And these emerging technologies are allowing manufacturing, production in ways that we've never thought of before. And in our near future and in our future, the possibilities are going to be expanding even more. And so one of the things we've noticed is that these emerging technologies allow production to occur in remote rural regions, so that you don't have to be near a large urban network or ecosystem or near natural resources such as water, electricity, or whatever like that. You can provide these micro factories, if you will, in a variety of different ways throughout the nation. And so we're able to expand the production that's out there. We want to take advantage of this. And so that's what the exploration has been about, is how can we in tribal nations and in Indian country take advantage of this wave of technology, a wave of influence, so that it makes sense, so that there's additional revenue streams, additional career pathways, and a number of different possibilities and potentials for peoples in these nations. So that's what we've been exploring. These webinars allow us to have a kind of an in-depth discussion about that. The first webinar a couple of weeks ago was concerning what is advanced manufacturing, what are these emerging technologies, and let's define them a little bit. So we went through that and did that. This webinar is primarily how do we actually do this? What's happening at this point? So we're going to explore some things that are happening on some tribal colleges in some tribal areas, and also talk to a really cool company that has a micro factory, that has created one, is running one, and is being successful in that, and knows that we can do these really with the right skill set and the right talent and the right entrepreneurial spirit. They can pop up anywhere. So we want to explore that a little bit more too. And then we'll be talking about some of the resources that help support these ideas as we go forward. Our third webinar will be in a couple of weeks. Keep posted. We'll let you know who and where that's going to be for sure. But we're going to be exploring, okay, how do we put all this together? Once we have all this information, how do we put all this together? So again, thank you to the National Science Foundation for having the foresight to experiment and research these kind of ideas and push the limit for our thinking. And we will continue our discussion today, because these are all great friends and good people and experts that I know that we can all learn from. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Stephen. Hang on just a moment, please. So again, welcome to today's webinar on advanced manufacturing in tribal communities. What works in Indian country? In our first webinar, we asked, what is advanced manufacturing? Where we learn how crucial talent and making by hand are to using machines and technology to make repetitive processes more efficient. We also learned that advanced manufacturing also means an advancement in learning, that to become a technician no longer requires a 2 or 4 year degree and only may require simple skills to be able to enter the workforce. We learned of a ratio 1:7, meaning for every 1 PhD, there are 2 engineers needed, but there are 7 technicians needed. So in terms of workforce development and for tribal college students and tribal college programs, while there is still a strive to produce more Indigenous American Indian graduates, recognizing that there is still a significantly higher need for talent. And talent doesn't necessarily always require a 2 year degree, a 4 year degree, a PhD, but may only simply require a bit of skill set. So today, we're thinking a bit more about how communities can engage advanced manufacturing, understanding examples of advanced manufacturing in action, recognizing the resources and support there are available for entrepreneurs, and to learn firsthand from successful operations just what it takes to make an advanced manufacturing operation work for tribal communities in Indian country. Also, from learning from these experts, we can identify processes and resources for tribal people and figure out how to get started with an advanced manufacturing operation that provides economic growth, that supports Native peoples, and enhances tribal cultures and advances self-determination. So to begin, it's my honor to introduce Nick Bittner, graduate and now instructor at the Chandeska Chicana Community College. Oh, Nick, floor is yours.
Well, thank you for that. Very kind words. But as everyone was saying, my name is Nick. I am just a guy who likes to make things, and that's all I will ever be. I teach at Chandeska. I actually teach at United Tribes Technical College as well. I do advanced manufacturing, but also 3D modeling and simulation technologies. So most of the time when I have these talks, I like to talk directly with the audience, talk directly with the people, and find out where they want to understand more about and facilitate more of a conversation. But today, we're going to go down the rabbit hole of why partnering with TCUs is actually beneficial to everyone. Along with TCUs being in the middle of most of the time a tribal nation, we on the tribal nations have a larger population that needs jobs. There is a workforce deficit we found there, and we've been targeting it specifically with a lot of our last few grant submissions, solely because if we had good quality jobs to bring home, which a lot of remote work can be done now, or if you buy single sets of equipment, you can produce a lot of needed parts, but you can produce them from anywhere as long as you can ship them. So as long as you have a FedEx depot within an hour of you, the floor can be yours for a lot of those technologies. But for us specifically, it's all highlighted by our students. Their industrious spirit is what keeps our program alive, and it always will be. And I've found most of the time, these younger kids, they've just never been told they're worth it, that they've just never had an instructor that believed in them. And when you give them the opportunity to showcase what they can actually do or ask something of them, they will always surprise you. And that's what our program tries to do specifically. Is when I took it over, was it 2 years ago now? 2.5 years ago-ish now, I ungraded all of our classes. in our advanced manufacturing department. So our department isn't run on the traditional, here's a test, memorize this book, spew out the answers, forget it all. Because that statistically is what happens. You memorize that material, and there's actually an independent study that was done at a research college that I'm affiliated with, that we took students going from Calc 1 into Calc 2, and after Christmas break, we tested those students on retention coming back from the material they just had learned. 7% retention of knowledge from a 16-week course. That's not good. And we were saying, why can't we try this a little differently? Because we can't do any worse than that, fundamentally. So can we try something new? Just hear us out. And we were allowed to do that. So we switched to a program where projects are the emphasis. I have students right now that they are proving mastery in skills by fabricating, by processing jobs. We have companies and colleges that we work with directly, and they have prototypes that need to be fabricated. We're making the functional prototypes for a large multi-state, multi-million-dollar biotech company. And I have 3 undergrad students who are facilitating the materials, they're facilitating the nesting of the files into designing. They are the ones who package it, post-process it, ship it. They do it all except for setting up the contract. That's where I come in. I say, this is what we're making. How do we do it? We delivered 3 functional prototypes for that project, and I think it was about an $8 million project on that end. That's class for them. Building them into what they can do as a career, furthering them and letting them choose a skill that they want to enhance their career with, and then giving them college credit to do it. One of our students wants to be a manager when he's done. So I said, we're setting up this lab, be our lab manager, make the material safety data sheets, oh, you guys want to order something? Well, we need quotes, we need the links to it, we need the prices. Set a system up where you can submit it as an employee to us to streamline that. That's your homework this week. We're building the workforce. I don't want to be part of the nation where telling someone because they can't pass calculus doesn't mean they can't be in STEM. And that's what engineering degrees are now a lot to me is, oh, you can't do this high level archaic math. Obviously, you're not good enough to be here. And that's like the old saying of ask a fish to climb or a monkey to swim. Obviously, it's not the skills that they might be best at. But this is our opportunity to take that and work with it. And so far this year, we have placed interns at national laboratories, Los Alamos, which we heard from last week. Sandia, which we heard from last week. Their sister site, Los Alamos, we just placed an intern there last week. We have a large research grant for original research that actually I proposed that we are fabricating on for NASA. We're actually building spacesuit parts on our tiny tribal college campus that will support the Artemis mission, going to the moon and building the lunar base. I have 9 students in my department. Just the opportunity is all you need. And you can create it anywhere. So why not where we're at? So we just placed a student we have, because of that work, they're placed on a NASA internship. Those are the career building moment that we are striving for, and less on getting our test numbers up and all. It's more on making makers. You can teach people to be creative again, because a lot of the schools we standardize everything, we suck the creativity right out of these kids. And I have the statistics to prove this. It's not ABET, the accrediting facility for the engineering colleges in our nation, has been striving to make people take an innovative route for years and years. The documentation's all there. And what we're doing is actually applying that. So when you look at, if you teach people to also make stuff, because that's all I'm good for, is making things. And so the way I help people is by showing them how they can also make things. But when you start letting people make stuff, they start thinking more creatively, thinking outside of the box, and then they become creators. So when you have a bunch of young people who want to make things, and then you bring them back into a place that needs stuff made, because part of our department is also finding a project to support locally, like when the door hinges, or they just built a new commercial kitchen on our facility to teach nutrition. Well, the electrical housings were hanging in an improper position. So a class project we had was build something to fix that. So then they support local, and they can find projects in the environment of the college or go outside the college. And as long as they can pitch it to us and write a project report on why it is a good idea, now you have students locally supporting the local community in a way that would have never been allowed traditionally. But they're fixing problems that they've had in their lives. They're passionate about it, and they will do more for you than you will ever ask of them. And that was the best part about letting them do these passion projects, was they actually started in the class to suggest their own homework assignments. So I've never experienced that before, where students have taken ownership of their own education to the point they're suggesting what we should do next week for their homework assignments. So if that's the wrong thing, I'm definitely in the wrong business. But my worry is the NSF actually just passed a lot of wording on how their grants will now be supplemented to the tribal nations, where it's good change, but it'll be a few more steps. So I really wanted to educate people about this because it just happened about 2 months ago. You will now need a set of cover letters direct from the governing body of a tribal nation to allow them to be included in a research grant from the NSF. So you have to contact they haven't said specifically who it is yet, but like the Regency Board or the chairperson or whoever it is, to ask who you should talk to about it, have that letter, and then the letter they send back to you telling you who to contact, that letter, and then the letter contacting that person, and then their response and a cover letter, and you have to bundle all that up and include it in your submission. And if you don't have that set of letters now, your grant submission is instantly void. So just to inform people that it's a good change, because I think there was some less optimistic use of including tribal nations than we're used to. So it's a good change, but it just takes a couple more steps that people need to be prepared to deal with, or manage is a better word. But the great thing about the TCUs is we are incredibly flexible. It makes us very nimble, makes us easy to work on a lot of really advanced projects, but we can switch directions incredibly fast. And that's why a lot of our machinery in our lab is based on, if we need to be nimble, we can be. So we run a lot of stereolithography equipment, like resin printers, because they're large format ones. But if I want to go from producing fire resistant parts to producing elastic parts to producing incredibly tough durable parts, all I need to do is change out the vat and one canister of material, and I can totally switch chemical components on our designs. And so finding this balance between quality equipment and equipment that you can use to support multiple projects, even after the one you used to buy it is over. That's one of my biggest pet peeves, is people buy a thing so specific for a grant that as soon as the grant is over, it dies. Like, or it can only be used for that very one thing. And it's like, well, then, unless you're doing that one thing, what good is this? You need to be able to adapt and be nimble. Like most of our coworkers with big companies, I was teaching my students about this last week, where floor space is a value. And if the machine you have sitting there taking up that floor space isn't making enough money to offset the floor space, it's gone. You find something to replace it. Research, we don't have to deal with that luxury. If we have the space, something can sit there for a couple of months and not be used, and that's okay. But we need to find the people who we can support because of that and build our local industry, local economy to supplement. We can be using research to supplement again. And that's really where we stand, is our ability to build that type of nimble relationship with people like the large research institutions in our state. Right now, we're actually working on our NASA grant. We have a collaborator with the University of North Dakota. They have the research scientists we need to validate our experiments. Likewise, we have the capability to actually make the things they need to do the research. So I didn't think it was that crazy of a stretch to say, you guys think it, we'll build it. But apparently that was a really big stretch for a lot of people. So that's what I've been advocating for the past, I don't know, 4 years, is why don't we work together? We already have the equipment to build this, but you guys have the thinkers. Let's do this together. And that's what we've been working on a lot the past couple of years, is building that relationship. So that is my soapbox talk for today.
Hey, Nick, just to follow up on that real quick, could you just explain a little bit about the new project or the new vision that the University of North Dakota has in infusing or embedding tribal colleges into their system and into their facilities? I think that's exciting because it's kind of a culmination of what you have been advocating for.
Yeah. So recently we've been in talks with actually putting a satellite campus of our tribal college at a research university in our state. That way we would be able to support the tribal nations much better, but we would have local resources for, say, we have students that want to get their 4-year degree, or students that want to go into a graduate degree, or bringing students in to do local training. Like, if I have a 5-axis CNC machine on a campus that has aerospace engineering, it's going to get used. If I have a 5-axis CNC machine sitting at a tiny tribal college out in the middle of nowhere, it's much harder to facilitate that relationship. So I'm thinking, why can't the tribal nations extend into these bigger areas? They can have representation there. They can have a footprint they call their own locally, but are still supported by the tribal nation. And we've been in talks on doing just that, putting incredibly high level machines at a research institution. So we have the ability to have partners for fabricating incredibly advanced stuff. We're looking at scramjet engines, looking into the hypersonics, looking into building blisks for big turbine engines, but turning around and then working with the rocket team to design their Mach 2 system for 30,000 feet. where you can go down all this. And my background is actually I'm part of the biomedical engineering department there. So we're also looking at building surface topologies that map hip inserts so we can have better hip replacements that are more conducive to bone matricing when we're done building them. There are all these things that need to be made. And since the University of North Dakota has implemented an IBL pedagogy, innovation-based learning, which actually mirrors our project-based learning really closely, where their students, half of their grade actually comes from doing a project that's pitched by the students. So every student in the entire department, freshman all the way through PhD, has to pitch a project at the beginning of a semester. And everyone else sees everyone else's video project pitches. And then you choose which group you want to join. And you need 3 students on a group for it to run. You can get more, but you can't have less. So right now we have, I think it's 40 student projects running in the biomedical engineering department, and they don't have anyone to build them. And I'm thinking, if we have students who are in our lab who are there, why can't we make them part of those student teams, and they can facilitate the DFAM, the design for manufacturing? And you produce this tiny ecosystem of designers meeting with technicians, redesigning technician input. And you just have this nice little self-fulfilling prophecy. All of those projects get built, you have instant training built in, and then they have to learn to work collaboratively, even if they're not from the same discipline or the same background or socioeconomics. You need that to learn to work with each other. And that's a huge thing people forget. And we want to start this with a smaller system set up at our college that will be the first year you spend local. So 1, we know that you're actually invested, but 2, we can train you on the basics, train you in CAD modeling, train you in CNC work, train you in CAM work. And then you graduate from running the small desktop equipment we have at the Tribal Nation to the big, monstrous, advanced equipment we would have supporting the research universities. And then we could hire our own students as employees and pay them as they go to get their advanced degrees, if that became the situation. Or University of North Dakota has actually opened their engineering degrees. They're one of the top rated and only universities that offers a PhD in most of their engineering programs you can get remotely. So we now can offer a connection and a relationship between these 2 schools, that if our students need to stay on the reservation, they can still have access to getting a graduate degree, even if they don't leave. So that's kind of how we're trying to build this whole ecosystem to circle back into itself. So yeah.
Thanks, Nick.
Oh, very interesting discussion. And as the speakers are coming on board, if folks are interested on the Jamboard on page 2, feel free to be thinking about, like, how could an advanced manufacturing ecosystem work for your community? What might that look like? And these are just some ways for us to kind of think creatively and think collaboratively. So I'd like to introduce Karen Caswelch and Ryan Polk from Architas to tell us a little bit more about how an advanced manufacturing operation in framed as a microfactory can be profitable for rural communities. Maybe some lessons learned from your entrepreneurship, or lessons learned about educational pathways that work, and really even thinking about what could work for tribal colleges. And lastly, like, kind of thinking very practically, what does it really take to begin something like this? But would love to hear you. And the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Patrick. Karen, please introduce yourself, and then I'll just give a quick intro as well.
Hi, so I'm Karen Caswelch. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Architas, and I need to start with my story. I'm African American. My grandparents were both born in 1899 and only had an 8th grade education. And education was primary in our family. 3 of their 4 children had advanced degrees. And I have a mechanical engineering degree from MIT and an MBA from Harvard Business School. And I started my career at General Motors, primarily in production. And you know, I will tell you many years, like 40 years later, Nick, I can't remember math. I was super skilled at it then, but I can't remember it. Yeah, exactly. But I working in the GM full-size pickup assembly plant, I saw people who reminded me of my grandparents, really smart, brilliant people. And they were told, you know, clock in, leave your brains at the door. And I wanted to do something different. And when I met Ryan, we started talking about what we wanted to do. We shared kind of a spiritual connection. And so I'm going to stop there and let Ryan take it on.
Okay, thanks, Karen. Thanks. Yeah, yeah, Karen and I obviously have some differences in our backgrounds, but we have some similarities as well. And so we really bonded on the idea of using manufacturing as a way to advance human flourishing. Is a concept that you may have heard of. It's described in different ways. Helping people thrive is another way to talk about it, and that's what shows up in our mission statement: is thrive through automation. And so it's really an honor to be here. It's very much an honor to be part of this effort, and we appreciate everyone welcoming us into this. And we want to, I think, start with a comment that was made in the last webinar. There was a Jamboard comment made. I'm going to read it. The comment said, "I would like some examples of advanced manufacturing applications for tribal communities or colleges. Something besides making trinkets to give away." And we have a specific proposal or a suggestion that we think Nick builds really well on all the things that you just described, all the good work that you and your peers are doing. And our specific suggestion is to start with contract manufacturing. We're going to tell you a story about Architas today, where Architas starts as a contract manufacturer. We are, Nick, what you would have called, or what you called, a builder. But builders eventually have to become thinkers in order to solve problems that come up in the real world life of building. And eventually that thinking allows people to create new ideas and become owners of intellectual property. And our specific proposal, the story we're going to tell you today that illustrating its proposal, is that the tribal communities, the tribal nations, start contract manufacturing operations that are owned by the nations, and that they are doing work for larger manufacturers in the kinds of industries that Nick talked about. Aerospace is a great example of that. And by starting those contract manufacturing facilities on the land of the tribal nations, that provides a place for folks graduating from these colleges to work. And it starts the process of builders becoming thinkers and eventually becoming creators. And that's what I think the Architas story that we're going to show you today can illustrate through the power of a very small contract manufacturer. And we called it a microfactory. And so I'm going to stop talking, and Karen's going to take over and tell you what we did at Architas as an illustration of our suggestion.
So, the first thing, so this is the front of our facility. The first thing we said is we want to be a mission-driven and values-driven business. And so, when we interview, when we talk to people about joining our company, we always start with talking about values and try to assess, do they understand the values? And what we found is that when we start with that values-driven business, people are engaged because it's more than just a job and a paycheck. They're engaged kind of through the heart. You know, and when you look at your team, when we focused on values, what we found is we ended up with a very, very diverse team as part of this process. So the next step is I want to take you on a quick tour of our microfactory. So we've got very organized. This is where we're building our robot. Everything has a place. And then we're also using 3D printers. So this advanced manufacturing to build all the structural parts of the robot.
And the microfactory space is just a little under 2,000 square feet.
And it was under $100,000 of investment.
Yeah.
So very, very reasonable. And what we said in the microfactory is we wanted to provide opportunities for people to acquire skills, but then for knowledge to flourish. And part of our ethos as we're building our robot is that there's always a better way. So everyone learns how to build the robot, but once you learn, then is there a better way? So it's not just go do this job, but we're constantly expecting thinking and creative. And to give you perspective, when we started building this robot as a contract manufacturer, it took approximately 40 hours to build one robot. We now have that down to under 15 hours. And it was through everybody who came in, learned how to build, they'd start learning. We also found that some people, as they started building, they were better at doing something else. And so our vision was that you would always have opportunity for upskilling as part of that process. This is our manufacturing environment. This is the same picture that's actually behind me right now. And as you see through this process, every station has you can have a robot, you can have a build station, all the tools that you need, all the parts that you need for that station are all right there, which then gives you that process. But as part of the learning, we're teaching quality systems, we're teaching inventory management, we're teaching ERP, and we're also teaching how do you 3D print, how do you process improvement. So for example, part of that improvement in hours of 60-70%, as you're building, we say, oh, if I only had something that would help me, well, then someone would design with CAD, would design a build aid, we test it out a couple times. And so at every station, we have aids that we designed to help us build this robot. So then what happens next? Well, we started identifying that there was a need for robotic fundamentals. So we developed, we took our robot, developed training classes, and created fundamentals for robotics that is now being taught in the community colleges. The other thing we heard as people came for tours through our facility is, oh, could you set up a learning microfactory? I really love this. So we're in conversations right now with some local communities about setting up the learning microfactory at a high school level where kids could come in, learn how to build the robot, and kind of to Nick's point, that project based, but it's project around, just building something, but they could learn ERP systems, quality systems, how to 3D print, problem solving, and then take that robot, do some of the fundamentals, and then how do you use that robot to build the next generation robots? And if you start that at not just a community college level, but a high school level, then you're starting to identify students who are really interested in robotics, automation, but have also learned how to build something and can get creative. So we've taken this microfactory concept where we're going to build a robot and then continue to create intellectual property to move our business forward. So Ryan, why don't you take this one?
Sure. Yeah, so so our journey so the arm that you saw in the pictures is an arm that we did not invent. We can't we can't claim ownership of that intellectual property or brag about this invention that we made. But we did partner with, or what we did do was partner with the people who had invented the technology, who didn't know how to and really want to learn how to make this robotic arm in a repeatable, scalable manner. So we became a contract manufacturer. And our idea was to not have a single large mega factory that would make hundreds or thousands of arms. Our idea was to have smaller factories that could go into metropolitan areas, and specifically in the communities inside of those metropolitan areas where STEM type jobs had been underrepresented and where people hadn't quite been welcomed into the STEM community, and use that as a really small hub of perhaps some human flourishing inside of that community, inside of that area. And so this microfactory concept, we think, is really one that we can take around the country into multiple communities, eventually, perhaps even into some other countries besides the United States. But that was really our dream. And when you're focused on building inside of a community, obviously that ratio, when that ratio came up earlier, Patrick, the 1, 2, and 7, I see other ratios in my head as well. One employee may have 4 or more people inside of their household that they're also supporting. And one house in a neighborhood has n number of neighbors. And so this idea of human flourishing sort of rippling out of a small little investment, a small little focus on a human flourishing centric business is really, really meaningful to us. And so that really was the concept behind this expansion of the microfactories. And so these next couple slides sort of illustrate what that might look like. But I think I just want to, as we close our prepared comments, just want to repeat that we started doing contract manufacturing. We weren't inventors, but as we practiced contract manufacturing, we became creators. And what we created is this education tool, this education product that we think will have a much, much more significant impact than our original microfactory dream. We thought we'd have 10 microfactories, each employing 10 people, 100 people inside of our direct employment, maybe impacting 400 or 500 people through family relationships with our employees. But now what we've created is significantly bigger than what we had originally set out to do, because by educating folks on how to use robots more effectively, we can reach a lot more people, and we can bring flourishing and thriving through automation to a larger number of people. We are not here today on this call, or if you're watching this webinar, we don't hear what we're saying that we're trying to ask you to buy anything or follow our education program. That's not our intent. Our intent really is to tell a story that we think is very applicable to Indian country. It follows I think a lot of the things that Nick was talking about, and that is starting with contract manufacturing. And I think this microfactory concept is a really good way for contract manufacturing to manifest itself in tribal communities.
Oh, thank you. And this has been a very insightful perspective. And I think this is something that we were really hoping is to see very tangible examples. You know, what is a microfactory? And you really, quite frankly, highlighted something that is really important. You said, what do you actually need? About 2,000 square foot and less than $100,000 investment,
Yeah.
which quite frankly, and kind of following up a bit on what Nicholas was kind of sharing, that research space could facilitate that initial investment, which leads to the ability to support communities and others.
Exactly. Yeah, well, agreed. A lot of the assets are already there. There's tons of leadership already present there. Like I love the way Nick was describing the enthusiasm of his students. It's not just leadership that's there, but there's a willingness to really, I think, provide great value as a contract manufacturer. The missing ingredient really is business development. It's somebody putting together the legal entity that houses this contract manufacturer. There has to be an administrative element of that. That's true. This is a for-profit enterprise. And hopefully that's all done and owned inside of the community. The next thing that we need to have is someone representing that capability out to the larger manufacturers who need and use contract manufacturing every day, and invite them to use a new partner, to use a partner that's in Nick's community that can do contract manufacturing using a variety of machines and a variety of processes. And so let's get a legal entity started. Let's pick a place. Let's get it going. Let's identify what can that community do? What capabilities does it have? And then let's go out and market those capabilities to the companies that need it. And then we can bring work into the community through that relationship.
All right. Well, let's transition a bit. This is a great conversation and discussion. I think one advantage of working with tribal nations is that each is a sovereign, domestic dependent nation that oftentimes has its own ability to establish contracts, to establish leadership. And Nick, you point out something absolutely critical about the NSF requirement for not only just having consultation with tribes, but having assurances and having agreements and with that government-to-government relationship with tribal nations. And yes, it does add maybe another extra step, but it's a very critical step and something that's been missing for a while. And I think on top of that, it also provides more opportunities for workforce development from tribal colleges. There's so many TCUs that have business programs, that have like kind of paralegal programs, and just as all three of our presenters had mentioned, manufacturing isn't, advanced manufacturing isn't just the technicians, it's project management, it's the purchasing, it's the interpersonal interactions, right? Getting those contracts requires actually sometimes working with human beings, and that's a skill all in its own. So for our audience and participants, we're happy to open this space for questions, and you can either raise your hand and I'll call on you, or you can add the question to the chat and I'll read it for you. But right before they do that, I'd like to invite Mr. Stephen Catt to kind of maybe offer some insight. I know you had some prepared comments to kind of tie a bow on this present here.
Sure, and what I'd like to do is to talk a little bit about the Manufacturing Extension Partnership under NIST, which is a federal agency under the Department of Commerce. The feds, they go all over the place. but NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And they, for all the units of measure that we have, they're the ones that make sure that they are accurate and they are consistent across the whole United States. And it becomes more and more important as we get into higher quality and smaller measurements. The nanotech that we're going into now, they are at that cutting edge of determining, okay, what is a nanometer or whatever that new thing will be. But they're also at the cutting edge of making sure the technologies are being integrated and projected. Number of years ago, about a decade ago or so, under another administration, the Obama administration at that time, it was recognized that manufacturing was losing its edge. The United States was losing its edge to a lot of different places, China being one of them, but they were just losing a technological edge. So they created these things called manufacturing institutes, manufacturing USA institutes. And each one of those institutes were given a section of technology that they were to research to help meld the gaps between research and production. And so you had everything from additive manufacturing to robotics to flexible electronics, flexible hybrid electronics, to all kinds of different things going on. The newest one that they're going to be creating soon is artificial intelligence. I mention those things because manufacturing is really at the federal. I'm bringing us back a little bit to the 10,000, 20,000 foot level to see what's happening. The United States is regaining that prowess again. They want to reshore as much manufacturing as possible. And the other thing that we're seeing across the board, two things. Number one, they want to redistribute the wealth and the creativity and the production throughout all of the nation, so that if there are underserved areas of our nation that have not been able to grasp those new technologies to use them effectively, they want to enhance that to happen. So you're going to find a lot of investment and wanting to invest in these kind of remote areas, in urban areas that have been ignored for too many decades, and throughout our nation. So there's a lot of potential here. The other thing is to regain and claim the technological prowess that's out there. So those two themes are interacting in all of the investment that the United States is making right now. I'd like to share my screen and just share just an overall overview of manufacturing at this point.
I don't know if there's supposed to be sound with this or not, but
oh yes, sorry. I don't know why. My apologies.
Stephen,
yes,
Stephen, when you share that
yeah,
on the share window, there's going to be at the bottom left, there will be a little checkbox that says share sound as well.
let me see here.
Good old technology, right?
There it is. Okay, so sorry, I never knew that. So
well, Stephen, I know that because I have done the exact same thing that you just did. So.
Very good.
And then you switch between Zoom and then Teams and then
something else
right.
to make it real. To draw out a design, to test the concept, to build something that works. To put it in a box to ship all around the globe. Innovating, designing, producing, supplying, exporting. Making the products that enrich our lives, that create millions of American jobs. that drive our economy, that impact the world every single day. That's U.S. manufacturing, and that's why we are here. Since 1988, our mission has been to serve and support the men and women of U.S. manufacturing. Our team lives out this mission with passion and dedication. We work with those who are eager to innovate and grow, who want to find the solutions, the technologies, and the skills to become more competitive all around the world, proudly stating, "This was made in the USA." We are the MEP National Network, the only public-private partnership dedicated to serving small and medium-sized U.S. manufacturers in every state and in Puerto Rico. We help make an impact on their employees, their companies, and their communities. Be a part of making an impact on U.S. manufacturing.
Okay, that's just I wanted to share that because it does say a little bit about what manufacturing is, how wide it is, and it also showcases what those of us who are participating in this know, but most people don't, is that manufacturing can be an extremely creative process. It can be a very inclusive and team-oriented process, and it is not done in dull, dirty, dangerous places. Yeah, there are jobs like that, but for most of manufacturing, especially the advanced technologies, you have everything from what Karen just described to the clean rooms that are extremely clean. You know, so when you get into nanofabrication and those kind of things, it is just emerging so rapidly, and every technology. I worked for one of the Manufacturing USA institutes in robotics for a period of time, and what I was mostly impressed with, what I learned most, was that it wasn't each of the technologies that were advancing as fast as they were that was causing the transformation and revolution in production and manufacturing. What really was driving the huge change was the integration of all of those technologies and the creative use behind them. I toured one helicopter production plant, a huge plant in Connecticut one time, and they had two young engineers. Their entire job was just, how do you solve this problem? How do you solve this? And they were using additive manufacturing, robotics, everything else, and they were integrating all that. And if they didn't have an actuator at the end of the robotic thing that worked for them, they made it themselves. They created it and made it themselves, and were solving problems and challenges throughout that whole place. And just their efforts in 3 years that they were doing it, they increased the production of that entire plant like 20%. It was just, you know, that kind of knowledge, creativity, and enthusiasm and passion were just, it really impressed me as to how much we have to learn and to progress. Now, let's get back to another point I wanted to make real quick. My own background is that I live in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area. My whole career has been here in workforce development, community colleges, working with manufacturers, those kind of things. We've seen a lot of Rust Belt. I lived through the Rust Belt's demise of the steel industry just disintegrating in front of our eyes, and all the jobs that were lost and that kind of thing. I lived through that. I know what that's like. I have uncles and relatives who had to rebuild their lives because of that. But what we also saw was a real aversion to manufacturing. No parents wanted their kid to get into manufacturing because of the dull, dirty, dangerous stuff, but also they saw no future in it. What we're seeing now is that future. And what I've been trying to tell the tribal communities and Indian country is that you have the opportunity to leapfrog right into these new technologies. You don't have the legacies of old attitudes, of huge equipment, of the dilapidated buildings and that kind of stuff that we have to overcome in the Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana area. You can leapfrog right into these new things. And so I think there's a huge possibility here. And the reason why I wanted to share the MEPs, that's just one example of the resources that are out there to assist. They're at your beck and call. They're in every state, but that's just one level of assistance that's out there. That states have their own systems, communities have their own systems, and that kind of stuff. There's a lot of help out there if you take that first step. I think you're going to find out that there's a lot of people who are encouraging you to take more steps. So that's essentially what I wanted to make sure was shared with you today.
Oh, Stephen, thank you. All right. Well, we got a great group of folks here. And again, I want to thank all of our participants. Karen, Ryan, Nicholas, thank you all for being here. Very insightful. This is information I think is really important to hear and to share, and especially for our TCU faculty, staff, students, and community. Thank you for being here. I know how challenging it can be to find even an hour sometimes away from curriculum and planning and meetings. And so I'm very honored that you're here today and would love to hear from you if there's any questions that are coming to mind, or if there's anything that you'd like to reflect upon, or maybe even ideas about, how a learning / manufacturing operation could work at your TCU. So I'd like to open some space for questions. Yeah.
It's funny, the 2,000 square foot, I think our lab is about that size too, but I have single pieces of equipment that cost more than your entire lab does.
Yeah.
And so that's not like me being arrogant. That's me going like the feasibility of putting that small, it doesn't seem like a small amount of money, but as a business investment, it's really nothing to put something up like that. And when originally we did pitch an idea of putting a spoke network up where we would have a centralized facility that was larger and could handle training, could handle fabrication, but then we'd have 5 or so small manufacturing sites on every tribal nation in North Dakota, and they would each have their own specialty.
Mhm.
So we could work independently on contracts, but we could also work together and build something large, like,
Yeah.
the wiring harness here, the housing there, the electrical dispensation material paddings here, and then you send them all together and put them into one unit and then ship the unit. But I think one of our biggest drawbacks is we're always looking for that easy, who's going to hand us work. And I really think the contracts is such a good route to go. There, yeah, you got to do a little legwork to get them and find the right company and the right fit for both you and them.
Yeah.
But then the contracts keep the lights on.
Yeah.
The grants build capacity.
Yes. Yeah.
And our biggest issue right now is the grants are how we survive.
Yeah.
So every 3 years, if we don't have another grant in place, we're basically just surviving. We run our whole department off it. And if we could change that, where every 3 to 5 years, I don't have to be worried about my job not being there anymore because we're not stuck on that funding, would change the outlook of that entire department.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's going to be, I think there will be some very open people at large manufacturers to create the relationships and the contracts, the 3 to 5 year contracts, the high volume transaction work that you just described, Nick.
Well, our bespoke research, like we get I get people every other week probably emailing me, hey, can we need 5 of these?
Yeah.
And we build them 5 and send them. And then they go, hey, what would it take for you to send us 1,000?
Yeah.
And I'm like, no.
Yeah. Well, I think what we've mentioned to Stephen before is that Karen and I would be eager to help as an advisor, but we don't believe it's appropriate for us to be an owner or to be financially involved. We think it's more appropriate for that ownership to sit in the community. Otherwise,
Yes.
we're sort of defeating. I just don't think. I think that's counterproductive. Yes, we created
Local
jobs.
passion.
Yeah, yes, we created
Yep.
jobs, and that's good. But we really want to create an engine that creates jobs, an engine that creates ideas, an engine that creates wealth. And the combination of jobs and ideas and wealth is what you use to create the next company. And the ecosystem that those companies need, like transportation, even simple things like where are we going to go get lunch today? Right? Who's going to come in this evening and clean the floors for us? Who's going to do all these things that have to happen to make these kinds of places work? And so I think Karen and I aren't, we're not. There's lots of people who can do what we're describing, and I think there's lots of people who want to help. Just advise people who want to commit to owning and operating businesses. And there's probably going to be federal funds available in other agencies like the Department of Labor, maybe the Commerce Department. I don't know where all those might sit, but there's probably going to be other ways for us to get some help in funding, which only further incentivizes these large for-profit entities to take advantage of what we're proposing, because now they're saying, okay, I get to spin up this factory and someone else is paying for the upfront investment.
And it's a tax write-off.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it's kind of something like that. But yeah, contract manufacturing is a great place to start, in our opinion. And I hope that the story that we showed you today, our story, gives you a sense for that it's achievable. You're right, Nick. It's going to take a little bit of effort. But if people are already asking you, can you make 1,000 of these for me? Well, the door's open. Let's figure out how to make it happen.
Yeah, thank you. This is really solid insight, and especially thank you both, Karen and Ryan, for kind of offering to serve as advisors, and Nicholas for sharing a bit of your wisdom. We do have a question from our audience, and also audience members, if you don't feel comfortable asking a question directly, feel free to direct message me. So let's contextualize. Oftentimes, tribal colleges that are smaller, you may only have through an associate's program, but may not have a STEM program of any kind. Right. But so let's think together. How would a smaller college, or one that has maybe limited capacity and resources and faculty, how would they start a program like this on their campus? And maybe Nicholas, maybe you have some experience working with your tribal colleges that might offer some, very clear examples of how to really begin.
Oh, that is such a loaded question, because I definitely have less time than I do ability. And most of our Tribal Nation TCU faculty members were already stretched to the limit. And so it ends up just being one more thing that they would have to tack on to their already incredibly busy schedules. So it's allocating resources effectively as a small, nimble entity. And then it's the funding. If you have local funding that will support you constantly, that's great, but it's usually smaller than the federal funding. And so it's finding the right balance for the work you want to accomplish. But these industries in STEM, we're lucky that they're financially very sought after because they have a return. The English department, it's harder to have a return on something because you can edit books, you can write manuscripts, but there isn't that desired need where if we invent a product, fabricate a product and sell it, that's an instant return that we could use to better what we're already doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so the STEM field, we have that luxury where if you have a little intellectual property, or you say, if we do this, people are going to use it and it will at least balance itself out. Even if it's a net zero, as long as you don't lose any money, the fact that you're facilitating your students' education is the payoff. As long as you don't lose money, I find it okay. Every project that we take on or we try and facilitate starting up a new area like CNC work. Can we get to that point? I'm pretty business minded. I've been involved in that a long time too. And can we get to a point where it won't cost us anything to do it? As long as we're not losing money, we don't necessarily have to make money, but as long as we don't lose anything, that's feasible then, and we can build up from there. We start off in the red, and the first 3 years we're going to stay in the red, not so much. But it's looking at your individual situation and leveraging what you have locally and what's important to you, because you get burned out doing this. Constantly chasing other people to support something just for you is emotionally and mentally very challenging. I've actually been having conversations lately about a lot of the burnout the faculty members are having and other students are having, because I end up having to facilitate. I have a lot of research I've got funded, but I'm in, like today, I literally haven't left my desk since 8 o'clock this morning because I have back to back meetings. That's not even an exaggeration. That's literally my every Friday. But if I'm not at those meetings, we lose that funding. And so I end up facilitating all of the bureaucracy. So then someone who doesn't care as much about the research I wanted to do and got funded needs to do that research so we keep the money. And so I end up having to do all the managing to keep everything organized, the reporting, all of that. And I don't even get to do the research that I'm the one who submitted for to begin with. So you're relying on people who are probably less experienced, less skilled in that area, and certainly less passionate on that area to then keep that research afloat to report for the grants. And so it comes down to, can you strike a balance? I think that's always the most important question.
Thank you, Nick. And we did have another question from the audience, and you kind of started to address this. So you mentioned that, allocating resources effectively and being a small operation, especially in thinking about tribal colleges and another tribal enterprise, but really funding being the big question, but knowing funding sometimes comes with a cost, particularly research dollars and particularly, say, federal dollars. So I guess a good question, and we may not have the answer to this, and we'll actually kind of maybe position well for our third webinar, is really asking who else needs to be a part of these conversations. How do you get key administrators and leadership, from both the tribal colleges, but also agencies and also the tribes themselves and other partners to really kind of set the agenda, to acknowledge that this is something that would be healthy for the communities and move forward. Any thoughts? And we'll ask all of our panelists. So maybe I'll start with you, Karen, because you sound like you've really built something from the ground up, but tell me about, how do you engage leadership?
I keep going back to mission driven, right? That Ryan and I, we have a vision of changing people's lives. And I've lived that vision my entire life, as has Ryan. And, so if I'm sitting at a in a tribal nation, it's like, what could we do and lay out, here's a potential vision, how do you fund it? How do you get started? And finding that, the right one or two people to invest in that vision. I mean, frankly, as an entrepreneur, how do we fund our business? Well, we've got, you might take a look at, a pitch competition where here's the market, here's the business, here's the product, this is what we're trying to do, and put together kind of a 10 to 12 page business case but it's not just making lots of money. It's about enhancing creativity, enhancing development. That's sort of the big picture. Now, I will say the small picture is getting 3D printers. And you can get 3D printers. There's $100 printers, there's $1,000 printers that are just, you know, the basic simple printer, but there's integrated learning that happens. You have to learn how to design. You have to understand something around material properties to decide what kind of filament to use. I mean, there's, and it's not at a college level, it's at a much lower level. And the question is, could you even, you know, Ryan started talking, the question is like, but what about, we don't want to just do trinkets, but maybe that's an intriguing way for young kids to start thinking as an entrepreneur. Could they create something, design something that will actually sell? And they start gaining the pieces of how do you cost something? How do you price something? And all the basics around that at a younger age that start that creative journey to what Nick is talking about. I just think project-based learning is so powerful that I kind of want to figure out how to steal some of the stuff that Nick's working on. It's that powerful.
Oh, Ryan, any thoughts?
I think for me, it's I would want to be. I'm just curious about how economic development happens inside of the tribal community, tribal nations, and I think if we could identify that, you know, since Stephen introduced this concept to me, I told Karen the other day, I'm like laser focused on a single thing. I just don't know who to work with, and I would love an opportunity to talk to somebody who has an interest in starting for-profit enterprises that will lead into advanced manufacturing work. And if we can make those connections, I think we want to see where those conversations go. And it all needs to be driven from within. It needs to be driven from within the community. And I think there are people who can help guide and advise in those conversations to take advantage of, to foster the motivation and ideas that people inside the community want to see come to life.
Oh,
You know,
all right. Oh, go ahead.
listening to Ryan, I mean, it's complicated because what you really want is your educators to educate.
Yep.
And if they're educating, they really are struggling, I think, going forward with business development.
Yep.
And you know, it, like, I can just imagine if Nick had a business development partner
Yeah.
that could then go execute that 1,000-piece order.
Right.
That would be a really interesting connection.
Mhm.
Yeah. We hope that we're not creating more work for Nick. We hope that there are other people. I think that I love this question that came up earlier, who's not in this conversation that needs to be in the conversation? And I think the for-profit sector needs to be engaged so that they can start. I think we you know, nobody, I've heard the story about the situation that happened in New Mexico with Boeing. I don't think anybody wants to repeat that kind of event. But it's also, we also don't want to be impractical and think that we can automatically just start up a Boeing type facility in a place that today doesn't have much to start with. And so, you know, Karen and I are from the Midwest. I know that, you know, those of you who are from the Midwest, there's a saying that I heard when I was growing up that if you want an acorn, the best time to plant an oak tree was 20 years ago and today. And so let's get started. Let's plant some acorns and let's let those things grow so that we can get a little more. Nick needs help. His peers need help. They need an ecosystem of for-profit enterprises that are directly aligned with their educational mission. And that's a missing piece of this conversation. Educating folks in rural areas where I grew up. I grew up in rural Indiana. You educate folks in rural Indiana, and they leave, and they go to Chicago, and they go to St. Louis, and they go to Dallas. They don't come back to rural Indiana. So how do you create opportunities for people inside of the communities where they grew up to return back to those communities, or maybe even to never leave, to get fully educated there and to find flourishing employment there? That's what I think we got to figure out. And I think it starts with somebody in the upper, it seems to me, somebody in the upper echelon, upper management of the nations, identifying how we create for-profit enterprises. And then we start with that.
All right, well, we are just about out of time. And again, I want to thank all of our panelists and thank all of our participants for joining us here today in this great conversation. It will be recorded and then shared out in the future, but I think this is really setting us up for our final workshop, which will be, it's tentatively scheduled for April 19th at the same time. And we're really going to talk about this paths forward and potential resources. And we'll be joined by kind of with an introduction from the AHEC president. But in the meantime, hopefully everyone can help us to really spread the word about this, because we've had some great discussions, but this next one is really going to be thinking clearly and building these partnerships. So so keep an eye on your email and on your LinkedIn and on AHEC, and we will we'll continue this conversation. But again, thank you everyone for being here today. Thank you to the American Indian Higher Education Consortium for allowing us to be able to host this work. Especially thank you, Kathy Applin. You've been amazing thus far. Thank you, Dr. Stephen Catt, for managing this program. And thank you, of course, to the National Science Foundation for funding this work. Everyone have a wonderful day, and I look forward to joining you again soon. Oh.